own this house, Marcus. I've always owned this house. And in exactly 3 minutes, the FBI is going to arrest you in my kitchen." My 72-year-old hands didn't shake as I said it, even though my cheating ex-husband had just finished moving his pregnant 28-year-old wife into what he thought was his new home. The same house where I'd buried my parents, raised our children, and survived cancer twice. The same house he'd tried to steal from me in our divorce. Marcus dropped the box labeled Tiffany's baby clothes and laughed, actually laughed, like I'd told him a joke. "Evelyn, honey, you need to take your medication. The house is mine now, remember? The divorce was based on fraud," I interrupted, pulling out my phone to show him the recording app that had been running for the past 10 minutes. "Just like your marriage. Did you know your precious Tiffany's real name is Jennifer Harrison? Did you know she's done this to 6 other men in 3 different cities? Did you know she's the daughter of the CEO, whose company you've been embezzling money for?" The color drained from his face. Through the kitchen window, I could see the black SUVs pulling up to the curb. "What did you do?" he whispered. I smiled for the first time in months. "I played the game better than you did." That's when the front door exploded open and the FBI agents shouted, "Nobody move!" But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how Dorothy Washington, not Dorothy Harrison, never again Dorothy Harrison, brought down a criminal empire and saved her neighborhood. All because a foolish man thought he could outsmart the woman who'd been playing chess while he was still learning checkers. 6 months earlier, I'd found the text messages by accident. Marcus had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered, and when it buzzed with a notification, I glanced over out of habit. The preview showed enough to make my world crumble. "Can't wait to be Mrs. Harrison. This old house will be perfect for us once she's gone." The she was me. The house they were discussing was the Victorian home I'd inherited from my grandmother in 1987. The house Marcus had insisted we move into after we married. The house where I'd lovingly restored every room, where I'd planted the garden that now bloomed magnificently each spring. The humiliation deepened when I discovered that half the neighborhood already knew. Marcus hadn't been subtle about his midlife crisis romance with Tiffany, a secretary from his accounting firm. They'd been seen together at restaurants, shopping centers, even at the community center where I volunteered twice a week. The worst part came at my own volunteer shift. I was serving lunch to seniors when I overheard 2 women at the next table. "That's Marcus Harrison's wife," one whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Poor thing has no idea he's been parading that young girl around like she's already his wife." "I heard they're looking at apartments together," the other replied. "Someone should tell her." I dropped the serving spoon with a clatter that made everyone turn to stare. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, and I could feel their pitying eyes following me for the rest of the day. But the final blow came during the divorce proceedings when Marcus's lawyer argued that since he'd been the primary breadwinner throughout our marriage, he deserved to keep the house. The man had the audacity to bring charts and graphs showing Marcus's income versus mine, as if love and sacrifice could be quantified in spreadsheets. "Mrs. Harrison," his attorney had said with a smug smile, spreading his hands as if he were explaining something to a child, "surely a woman of your age would be more comfortable in a smaller, more manageable living situation? Perhaps a nice assisted living facility." I felt my face burn with rage, but I kept my voice steady. "I've been managing just fine for 72 years, thank you." The lawyer chuckled. "Of course, but at your age, maintenance on a large house can be overwhelming." "Are you suggesting I'm incompetent?" I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. The room went silent. Even Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. The one who used to admire my strength instead of trying to diminish it. That night, I stood in my grandmother's bedroom. The room where she'd whispered stories of survival to me as a child. I ran my fingers along the windowsill where she'd carved her initials when she first bought this house in 1963. A black woman buying property in a white neighborhood when banks wouldn't even talk to women like us. "Grandmama," I whispered to the empty room. "They think they can take what you built." I opened her old jewelry box and pulled out the papers I'd hidden there months ago. My real estate license from 1975, faded but still valid. Marcus had made me quit using it when we married. Said it looked bad for his business to have a wife who worked. I'd been Dorothy Washington, one of the youngest black women to pass the Michigan real estate exam. Then I became Dorothy Harrison, Marcus's devoted wife. But Dorothy Washington had never really died. The next morning, I drove past the house that sold 3 blocks away last week. The sold sign still hung crooked in the yard, and I pulled over to make a call to my old supervisor at the housing authority. "Dorothy Washington." Jim's voice boomed through the phone. "I heard you were getting divorced." "About damn time, if you ask me." "Jim, I need a favor." "What do you know about the Harrison development purchases on the east side?" There was a pause. "Why do you ask?" "Because they just bought the 3 houses at the end of my street. And I have a feeling my soon-to-be ex-husband is mixed up in something bigger than adultery." "Meet me at Rosie's Diner in an hour," Jim said, his voice suddenly serious. "And Dorothy, bring that sharp mind of yours. You're going to need it." At Rosie's, Jim slid a manila folder across the grease-stained table. Harrison Development has been buying properties in 6 different neighborhoods over the past 2 years. Always the same pattern. They get inside information about upcoming city projects, swoop in and buy cheap, then flip for massive profits once the gentrification hits. I opened the folder and felt my blood turn to ice. There was Marcus's signature on a consulting agreement, dated 6 months ago, right around the time his affair started. The bastard's been selling out his own neighborhood, I breathed. That evening, I was watering my grandmother's rose bushes when I spotted the same black sedan that had been circling the block for 3 days. This time, it parked right in front of my house. A woman in an expensive suit got out, clipboard in hand, and started taking photos. I walked over, garden hose still in my hand. "Can I help you with something?" She startled, clearly not expecting to be confronted. "Oh, hello. I'm just doing a property assessment for insurance purposes." "Whose insurance?" I asked, letting the water from the hose splash near her designer shoes. Well, that's confidential." "Lady, this is my house you're photographing without permission. Nothing about it is confidential from me." She fumbled with her clipboard, papers scattering in the wind. As I helped her collect them, I caught a glimpse of letterhead. Harrison Development Corporation. My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. "You know," I said conversationally, "my husband works in real estate development." "Marcus Harrison? Maybe you know him." Her face went white. I have to go." She practically ran back to her car, leaving behind a single sheet of paper that made my blood boil. It was a preliminary demolition assessment, dated for next month. 2 weeks after my divorce would be finalized. They weren't just planning to steal my house. They were planning to tear it down. That night, I called my daughter Jessica in California. "Baby, I need you to do me a favor. Remember how you always said I should have been a detective instead of a teacher?" "Mom, what's going on? You sound different." "I'm about to become very different. I need you to help me set up some bank accounts your father can't access. And I need you to overnight me that digital camera you're always trying to get me to use." Mom, you're scaring me. Good, I said. Your father should be scared too. He just doesn't know it yet. Mrs. Patterson had lived next door for 40 years. The Johnsons across the street had raised 6 children in that house. The young couple 2 doors down had just had their first baby and were struggling to make ends meet. If I sold to developers, property taxes would skyrocket, and all of them would eventually be forced out. But if I didn't sell, Marcus would get the house in the divorce, and he'd sell to the developers anyway. At least this way, I could use the money to help my neighbors, maybe buy some of the other houses myself and keep them affordable. The stakes escalated further when I discovered that Tiffany wasn't just some innocent secretary who'd fallen for an older man. She was Harrison Development's inside source, the one who'd been feeding them information about which properties might be coming available. She'd targeted Marcus specifically because she knew about the house and its potential value. Marcus wasn't just cheating on me. He was being played by a woman who was playing a much bigger game. The private investigator I hired was worth every penny of the $5,000 retainer. Sarah Chun had 20 years of experience with corporate fraud cases, and she saw the patterns immediately. Your husband isn't just cheating, she told me during our first meeting at a coffee shop downtown. He's being played by professionals. Look at this. She slid photos across the table. Tiffany at lunch with 3 different older men over the past 2 years, all of them married, all of them living in neighborhoods that Harrison Development later targeted. She's done this before, Sarah continued. Miami in 2022, Phoenix in 2023. Each time, she targets a married man with access to valuable property, seduces him, convinces him to leave his wife, then manipulates the property sale to benefit her company. I studied the photos, my hands trembling with rage. How many families has she destroyed? Dozens. But here's the thing. They always disappear before anyone can prove the pattern. Until now. Sarah pulled out another folder. This time they made a mistake. They targeted someone who knows how to fight back. Over the next month, I became a woman obsessed. I documented everything, every dinner Marcus had with clients, every time Tiffany visited the house when she thought I wasn't home, every suspicious financial transaction I could access through our joint accounts. The breakthrough came when I followed Marcus to what he'd told his secretary was a client dinner. Instead, I watched him meet with Harrison Development's CEO in a private dining room at the city's most expensive restaurant. Through the window, I could see them shaking hands over what looked like contracts. I sat in my car in the parking lot, hands shaking as I dialed Sarah's number. "I've got him," I whispered. "I've got them all." But the real shock came when Sarah called me at 6 a.m. 3 days later. "Dorothy, you need to sit down. I found something that changes everything." "What is it?" Tiffany's real name is Jennifer Harrison. She's not just working for Harrison Development, she's the CEO's daughter. This whole thing, your entire marriage falling apart, it was planned from the beginning. The bombshell came during what Marcus thought would be our final meeting with the lawyers. He'd prepared a generous settlement offer. He'd keep the house and I'd get enough money to buy a small condo somewhere else. He was feeling magnanimous, ready to start his new life. "There's just one small issue we need to resolve," my lawyer said calmly, sliding a stack of documents across the table. "The question of who actually owns the house." Marcus laughed. "We've been over this. The house is marital property. I've been paying the mortgage for 37 years. Actually," my lawyer continued, "Mrs. Harrison has been paying the mortgage from her personal account, the account funded by her inheritance from her grandmother." The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized what this meant. In Michigan, property purchased with separate, non-marital funds remains the separate property of the purchaser, even if the spouse helps with maintenance and improvements. Furthermore, my lawyer added, Mrs. Harrison never added your name to the deed. The house has been in her name, and her name only, for the entire duration of your marriage. Marcus had been living in my house for 37 years, not the other way around. Every renovation he'd paid for, every improvement he'd made, had been to my property. Legally, he was little more than a long-term tenant who'd been paying rent in the form of utilities and maintenance. That's impossible, Marcus sputtered. I've been writing the mortgage checks. From the joint account, my lawyer replied smoothly, which was funded primarily by Mrs. Harrison's teaching salary and her inheritance investments. We have all the bank records. The divorce settlement Marcus had been so eager to sign suddenly looked very different. Instead of generously allowing me to take some money and leave his house, he was being offered a fair division of the actual marital assets, which it turned out, weren't nearly as substantial as he'd believed. But I wasn't done. The revelation about the house ownership was just the first phase. Marcus might not legally own the house, but he wasn't going to give up easily. He'd already promised Tiffany they'd live there together. He'd already started planning renovations. He'd already told everyone in his social circle that he was keeping the family home. Fine, he said after a week of his lawyer trying to find loopholes. You can have your grandmother's old house. But I want half of everything else, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it. This was where the real trap snapped shut. Because while Marcus had been focused on the house, I'd been quietly investigating our joint finances with a forensic accountant. What I discovered was that Marcus hadn't just been planning to leave me. He'd been systematically hiding assets for months. Money had been disappearing from our joint accounts in small amounts, transferred to accounts I'd never seen. Business expenses from his accounting firm had been mysteriously high, with payments going to companies that didn't seem to exist. Most damaging of all, Marcus had been using our joint credit lines to fund Harrison Development's property acquisitions, essentially lending our money to the company that was planning to gentrify our neighborhood. It was embezzlement, fraud, and conflict of interest all rolled into one. Marcus had been so busy planning his escape that he'd forgotten he was an accountant. And accountants leave paper trails. The private investigator I'd hired earned every penny when she uncovered the full scope of what was happening. Tiffany wasn't just working for Harrison Development. She was the daughter of the company's CEO. The affair with Marcus hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a carefully orchestrated plan to gain access to inside information about the neighborhood's redevelopment potential. But here's where it got interesting. Marcus wasn't Tiffany's first target. She'd done this before in other neighborhoods, with other married men who had access to valuable properties or insider information. She was essentially a corporate honeypot, using romance to facilitate gentrification. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity. Identify married men who owned or had access to valuable properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods. Seduce them, convince them to leave their wives, then manipulate them into selling the properties to Harrison Development at below-market prices. The men thought they were getting a fresh start with a young, beautiful woman. The company got prime real estate at bargain prices. Marcus was just the latest mark in a pattern that stretched back 5 years and 3 different cities. But Tiffany and her father had made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated Dorothy Washington. They'd seen an elderly black woman and assumed she'd be easy to dispose of. They hadn't counted on facing someone who understood their game better than they did. The moral dilemma intensified as I realized the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't just about my marriage or my house. It was about a systematic pattern of exploitation that had displaced dozens of families and destroyed entire communities. If I could expose this scheme, I could prevent it from happening to other people. But exposure would mean going public with humiliating details about my marriage. It would mean admitting that my husband had been manipulated by a woman young enough to be our daughter. It would mean facing the scrutiny of reporters, lawyers, and investigators who might not be sympathetic to an elderly woman seeking revenge. Armed with this new information, I refined my strategy. Instead of just saving my house, I was going to bring down the entire operation. But I needed to be smart about it. One wrong move and they'd lawyer up and disappear, taking their scheme to another city and other victims. I reached out to investigative journalists at 3 different newspapers, providing each with pieces of the puzzle but not the complete picture. I contacted the FBI's white-collar crime division with evidence of the financial fraud. I worked with community organizers to document the pattern of displacement in other neighborhoods where Harrison Development had operated. Most importantly, I played the role of the grieving, abandoned wife perfectly. I let Marcus and Tiffany think they'd won. I even helped them plan their wedding, all while documenting every conversation, every admission, every detail that would later be used against them. The beauty of my plan was that it used their own arrogance against them. They were so convinced they'd outsmarted an old woman that they stopped being careful. They started bragging about their success, making plans for future schemes, discussing details that they should have kept secret. Marcus, in particular, couldn't resist explaining to me how foolish I'd been, how I'd never understood the value of what I owned, how he was finally going to make something of himself. Every word was recorded on the device hidden in my purse. The confrontation came on a Thursday morning when I wasn't supposed to be home. Marcus had told me he was taking Tiffany house hunting for their backup property, but I knew better. I'd been tracking his phone for weeks. Instead, I found them in my kitchen, surrounded by paint samples and renovation magazines, planning the destruction of my grandmother's legacy as casually as if they were discussing the weather. "The kitchen island has to go," Tiffany was saying, running her manicured fingers along the butcher block my grandfather had installed in 1967. "It's so dated. We'll put in something modern, all white marble." "Whatever you want, baby," Marcus replied, his voice sickeningly sweet. "This is your house now." I stepped into the doorway. "Actually, it's not." They both jumped like guilty children caught with stolen cookies. Marcus recovered first, puffing up with false bravado. "Evelyn, what are you doing here? I thought you had a doctor's appointment." "I did. Dr. Patterson. You remember him, he handled the closing when we moved into this house 37 years ago. We had the most interesting conversation about property law." I placed the stack of documents on the counter between us. Bank records, property deeds, transcripts of recorded conversations, photographs of Tiffany with her previous marks, FBI case files on Harrison Development's suspicious transactions. Tiffany saw her own picture first, her face draining of color as she recognized herself having lunch with her other targets. "What the hell is this?" Marcus demanded, but his voice cracked on the last word. "It's the truth about your girlfriend, Marcus. Her real name is Jennifer Harrison. She's 28 years old, has a master's degree in business psychology, and specializes in seducing married men to manipulate real estate transactions. You're not her first target. You're not even her most successful one." I pulled out my phone and played a recording of Tiffany, Jennifer, on the phone with her father, discussing Marcus like he was a particularly useful tool. "The old man is completely hooked." Her voice came through clearly. "He'll sign anything I put in front of him. We should be able to close on the demolition contracts by next month." Marcus sat down heavily, his face gray. Tiffany, is this true? She didn't answer. She was staring at the FBI case files with growing horror. Oh, it gets better, I continued. Marcus, did you know you've been committing federal crimes? Embezzlement, fraud, racketeering. All to impress a woman who's been laughing at you behind your back for months. That's when I heard the cars pulling up outside. Marcus sank into a chair as he realized the magnitude of what he was looking at. Evelyn, I can explain. Oh, I'm sure you can. You're going to have plenty of opportunities to explain. To the FBI agents who are going to arrest you for embezzlement and fraud. To the IRS agents who are going to audit every transaction you've made in the past 3 years. To the reporters who are going to write about how a 72-year-old woman outsmarted a team of professional con artists. Tiffany found her voice first. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. I've been recording our conversations for months. I have bank records, emails, testimony from your previous victims, cooperation agreements with federal investigators, and a very thorough paper trail documenting every crime you've committed. I pulled out my phone and played a recording of Marcus explaining to me how he'd been moving money into hidden accounts, how the house renovations were being paid for with embezzled funds, how he'd been promised a cut of Harrison Development's profits once the neighborhood gentrification was complete. You played me, he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice along with the fear. No, Marcus. I played the game better than you did. The difference is, I was playing to protect my community and expose corruption. You were playing to get rich and abandon your family. Through the window, I could see black SUVs parking in front of my house. Men and women in FBI windbreakers were getting out, adjusting their earpieces, checking their weapons. Those are federal agents, Marcus. They're here for you. Jennifer, I refused to think of her as Tiffany anymore, made a run for the back door, but I'd anticipated that. Sarah Chun, my private investigator, was waiting in the backyard with 2 more agents. You played me, Marcus said, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the intelligent man I'd once married. No, Marcus. I played the game better than you did. The difference is, I was playing to protect my community and expose corruption. You were playing to get rich and abandon your family. The front door burst open. FBI. Nobody move. Agent Martinez, the lead investigator I'd been working with for weeks, stepped into my kitchen with his team. Marcus Harrison, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. As they read him his rights, Marcus looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years, respect. How long have you known? He asked as they cuffed him. Since the day I found your text messages. Did you really think you could outsmart a woman who survived 72 years in this world by being naive? Jennifer was screaming about lawyers and her father's connections as they dragged her out, but I knew it was over. The FBI had been investigating Harrison Development for months, and my evidence had given them everything they needed to shut down the entire operation. But the real vindication was still coming. As the arrest scene played out on my front lawn, neighbors began gathering. Mrs. Patterson clutched my arm, tears in her eyes. Dorothy, what's happening? Justice, I said simply. Justice is finally happening. The news crews arrived within the hour. I'd called them myself. By evening, the story was leading every local broadcast. Elderly woman exposes corporate gentrification scheme. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later, when I received a call from the FBI's asset recovery team. Mrs. Harrison, sorry Mrs. Washington, we've recovered approximately $2.3 million in stolen funds and assets. As the primary victim, you're entitled to restitution. I smiled, thinking of Mrs. Patterson's worried face, of the young couple with their new baby, of all the families who'd been saved from displacement. Agent Martinez, I said, I have some ideas about how to use that money to help my community. The house, my house, became the headquarters for a new community organization dedicated to fighting gentrification and protecting longtime residents from displacement. I used the money recovered from Marcus's hidden accounts to buy 3 other houses on the block, ensuring they'd remain affordable housing for families who needed them. Mrs. Patterson cried when I told her she'd never have to worry about being forced out of her neighborhood. The young couple with the new baby sent me a card thanking me for making it possible for their child to grow up in the same community where they'd found happiness. The moral dilemma that had haunted me throughout this ordeal found its resolution in an unexpected way. By fighting for my own rights, I'd ended up protecting an entire community. By refusing to be a victim, I'd prevented dozens of other people from becoming victims. Yes, I'd used deception and manipulation to achieve my goals. Yes, I'd recorded conversations without consent and set traps for people who trusted me. But I'd done it to expose a larger pattern of deception and manipulation that was destroying communities and ruining lives. Marcus had taught me an important lesson. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. But I'd learned something even more important. That fighting for yourself and fighting for others aren't contradictory goals. They can be the same fight. The money I recovered allowed me to buy a beautiful condo downtown, closer to my children and grandchildren. But I kept the house too. It's now a community center where neighbors can meet, organize, and support each other. The garden I planted blooms every spring, tended by local children who are learning about the history of their neighborhood and the importance of fighting for what's right. 6 months after the arrests, I received a letter from Marcus in prison. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make amends for what he'd done. The letter was filled with self-pity and excuses, but buried in the middle was a sentence that stuck with me. I never knew you were so strong. I wrote back just once. I was always this strong, Marcus. You just never bothered to notice. Today, at 73, I wake up every morning in my downtown condo, make coffee, and read the newspaper. Sometimes there are articles about gentrification, about communities fighting to survive, about people who refuse to be pushed aside. When I see those stories, I smile and remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to disappear. The house still stands on Maple Street, still beautiful, still protecting the families who need protection. And Dorothy Washington, no longer Dorothy Harrison, still stands too, stronger than ever, ready for whatever comes next. Because here's what I learned through all of this. They can take your husband, they can take your dignity, they can even try to take your home. But they can't take your intelligence, your determination, or your willingness to fight for what's right. And sometimes, that's all you need to win.